First, let me introduce myself. My name is Kevin May. I am with the Charlotte Planning Department on the UDO team. I was kind of the task lead on helping put together the part of the UDO that handles subdivision, streets, and infrastructure. Today, we've got a lot of staff support with us today. I'm going to try to highlight some of our key team members. I see Josh Weaver, who's our current subdivision administrator, has been very influential and key to the development of these standards. We also have representatives from the Charlotte Department of Transportation, Tracy Newsom, Felix Overgron, and we have some other specialists as well from Charlotte Area Transit with Jason Lawrence and Charlotte Water with Chris Saunders. Also some stormwater folks with Charlotte Water and the land development side with Kate Labadorf, as well as the other team members with me on the UDO team, Laura Harmon, the project manager, Alan Goodwin, the deputy project manager, and Allison Craig, our deputy department director. So there's plenty of resources here today to try to answer any questions that you may have, as well as discuss with you this section of the UDO. And as we go forward, what we'd like to do is we'll run down a little bit of the meeting procedures here. Staff obviously will narrate the presentation. For the dialogue during the presentation, what we'd like to have you do is enter any questions or comments in the chat box so that we can see them. If you're not familiar with Zoom, the chat function should be at the bottom, should look like maybe like a little cartoon balloon. And just to, so in fairness to everybody, we can be sure that everybody's comfortable using that chat function and maybe get acquainted a little bit with some of the folks that are joining us today. If you would just take a moment to type your name and or organization or neighborhood that you may be representing in the chat box, it'd be very much appreciated. So we'll give you about 60 seconds to do that, and then we'll go forward. So if everybody could enter your name and neighborhood or association organization in the chat box. Faith, I see, I know you've been one of our most loyal attendees at these conversations. Thank you for being here. Awesome, and I'm seeing everybody kind of streaming in through the chat. It's great for all of you to be here today. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it, and we look forward to the conversation. We're going to have a bit of a presentation for the sake of trying to make this about as much of a conversation as possible. We're going to try to get through it as quickly as possible so that at the end we'll be able to spend some time to address any comments or questions that have not been answered. As we go through the presentation, in real time, the staff support that I may have mentioned earlier that have joined us will be trying to answer the questions or comments the best that they can during the presentation. And if we happen not to address one of those during the presentation, or if maybe there's one that we need to circle back to, certainly we will do that at the conclusion of the presentation. So today, what we'd like to do is to give you a little bit of information as to what are and what are not subdivisions and when the subdivision standards apply. Also try to convey to you what is required for review and approval of subdivisions and exempt, what are called exempt plats. Also, we want to let you know how development builds connectivity and contributes to the city's transportation network. Learn how the UDO provides guidance on access to properties through driveways and a new concept called cross-access, as well as touch base with you on what other development infrastructure the UDO provides guidance on. Those are our purpose and our goals today. In fairness, we will get a little bit more weedy and in depth coming up with our second SSI conversation scheduled for about mid-January. At that time, we're going to cover required new streets and or improvements and the standards for those. And some of those topics that we'll be touching base on are trying to convey to you when or if development triggers new or improved streetscape, what the standards are for those improvements and how they would look constructed in the physical environment. And then also learning about how development may mitigate transportation impacts in and around a project, especially with what is being called a CTR, Comprehensive Transportation Review. So those are our topics for the upcoming meeting in mid-January. Here you'll see a breakdown of some of the key UDO schedule dates. Most of you are aware that the UDO was released in October. We're currently in our first public engagement phase where we're accepting comments on the first draft. That will occur all the way through mid-January. We'll take some time after receiving those comments to go through the UDO and make adjustments as we can, and plan to release the second draft of the UDO in March 2022, which we will then enter into another public engagement and comment phase stretching from March to April. We plan to take a public hearing draft of the UDO to council in May, public hearing in front of the council again in June, also seeking that same month a recommendation from the planning committee for adoption. We will have an adoption draft in July of 2022 with any comments that are additionally needed per council, with our current target date set for adoption of the UDO in July of 2022. So many of you may also know that the city recently completed its first comprehensive plan in quite some time, the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. It is the visionary document, the document that sets out the policies and the plans for how we would like Charlotte to grow over the course of the next 2 decades. Then the connection to that and the UDO is really the implementation piece, trying to put forth in our community how we would like Charlotte to grow over the course of the next 2 decades. And you can see there, part of that includes taking a stable of current development standards and collating them into one document, which we're calling the UDO. And you can see it stretches a number of different development guidelines and standards to which we're crafting the implementation tool for the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. So why develop this Unified Development Ordinance? And I touched on this in the previous slide. It's the primary regulatory tool, for implementation of the comprehensive plan. It allows for more predictability for future development. It aligns development regulations so they work better seamlessly together. It includes an update to the most recent best practices and revises development standards. It consolidates the development regulations into a single document, and then specific topic related regulations into one part or one place. We're trying to do this to be more user friendly, creating simpler terms and common language and increasing the use of graphics. And also there was a update from the North Carolina legislature in July of this year that updated the framework for planning and development regulation through the state. And so we needed to update some of our development regulations to comply with that new framework. The UDO is broken into several pieces. We've got the introductory provisions. We've got a large zoning piece, which covers districts, uses, and general development standards, a subdivision, streets, and other infrastructure section, a stormwater and natural resources part, and as well as a UDO administration, enforcement, and nonconformities piece. And as we all know, today we'll be covering subdivision, streets, and other infrastructure. And I said this at the outset, and as I said, we've taken to calling this internally SSI. So what is SSI? That is subdivisions, which may be subject to, or subdivisions that are where the subdivision standards apply, where you may be getting new streets or what you may think of as traditional greenfield development. They're also not subject to developments that subdivisions may be considered. Sometimes that is infill development or exempt plats. Streets, we're talking about street network and block design, curb and gutter, amenity zone and planting strips, sidewalks and shared use paths, and off-street public paths. And then recognizing that, subdivisions build infrastructure, and certainly streets are infrastructure, we've got other infrastructure pieces such as drainage, water supply, or sewer. The SSI part of the UDO is part 10 of the UDO. It is broken into 6 separate articles. Article 30 is the introduction article. Article 31 covers subdivision and the process and what is required in subdivision review, as well as the subdivision standards. Article 32 speaks to network cross-access and driveway regulations. Article 33 covers required new streets and transportation improvements. Article 34 speaks to the standards for those streets, off-street public paths, and cross-access. And Article 35, kind of piggybacking on what I just said about other infrastructure, is an article about that other infrastructure. With Article 30, that is, as I said, the introduction to the SSI. It outlines the purpose, applicability, and administration of Part 10 of the UDO. With regard to the purpose of the SSI section is to allow for and promote the orderly development of the city and its areas in the extraterritorial jurisdiction. It would apply to development activity and in some instances, changes of use within the city and CTJ. And going forward, a lot of you may be familiar, we currently have, as I mentioned, Josh Weaver, who's our current subdivision administrator. We see because the role of this section going forward has increased a little bit to streets and other infrastructure. We really see that going forward, this part would be administered by a subdivision, streets, and other infrastructure administrator. And with that, I'd like to introduce our current subdivision administrator, Josh Weaver, who is going to take you through the next segment of slides and give you a little bit more information about subdivisions. Josh?
Good afternoon, everybody. Subdivision is a term that is defined by state statute, which is what enables our cities to enforce the subdivision ordinance. And really, it comes down to a subdivision of land is any time that a new public street is created, because in effect, by creating that street, you subdivide property. But it's very simply when land is subdivided. Now, there's also exemptions from what defines the applicability of a subdivision. Those can be, one of the big ones is if property is less than 2 acres and it's divided into no more than 3 lots. The state has exempted those from subdivision ordinance applicability. Or if parcels are created that are greater than 10 acres, those are also exempt. Another example would be if you have 2 parcels of land and the property line in between those is changed, since you're not creating new tracts, those are also exempt. When those types of subdivisions that are exempt from the subdivision ordinance are recorded, because they're a map, our subdivision staff are required to review those maps. And so those are submitted as not subject to our subdivision ordinance maps. And they're reviewed to verify that lots that are created continue to meet the zoning, but there's no improvements that are required because they are exempt from the subdivision ordinance. Those maps are prepared by a registered surveyor, and then they're recorded at the Register of Deeds. Next slide. So then we also have 2 types of subdivisions that are subject to our subdivision ordinance, which means that the improvements are required as part of that subdivision. One is what you think of as it's called a major subdivision, which is what you think of when property is developed into a new neighborhood. So there's new streets required. It could be a multiple building site, such as apartments or townhomes. It could be a commercial development that has multiple buildings. And those subdivisions require new public streets. If we look at how connectivity works, by connecting new streets to existing streets. And we also would require improvements to the existing streets. The other type of subdivision is a minor subdivision, which is has less requirements. Mainly it's because they're developed along existing public streets. So there may be a tract of land that is more than 2 acres and somebody's creating 5 lots in a row. That would be subject to our ordinance, but the only requirement would be curb and gutter, tree save, and sidewalk along the frontage of that development. So when something is subject to our subdivision ordinance, like a new neighborhood, we look at how that subdivision is going to be developed, and we look at how the streets are going to be designed, if there's new or, well, if there's existing half streets, meaning maybe a developer didn't have enough of a project to build a whole street, and they dedicated half of the right of way. If another development comes in next to it, then we require them to build the other half of the street. We look at trees and natural vegetation. We look at how that development relates to parks and schools and greenways. And if it's adjacent to a greenway, for example, they may be required to dedicate land so that greenway can be extended in the future. We also look at how that new development relates to thoroughfares, and sometimes require streets adjacent to a thoroughfare to try to decrease the number of driveways along the thoroughfare. If it's adjacent to park sites, we might require them to work closely with Parks and Rec and connect maybe a sidewalk to a trail system in the park. We also look at public facilities. Maybe there's a police department that's looking to be located nearby. But we review that same subdivision for to make sure the street names are consistent with the requirements. They may be showing easements for power or gas or really just about anything. We also have the new subdivision reviewed by Charlotte Water for water and sewer connections and those extensions. And it's reviewed by our engineering department to make sure that the lots aren't subject to flooding. And if a subdivision is along the lake, we may require an access lot so that those residents can access the water. So when a subdivision is submitted, we first start with a sketch, which can be really just like it sounds. It's an idea of what the developer or property owner plans to design, and they submit that sketch so that we can really iron out any major concerns up front, so we don't go any further in the construction plan process with something that's not going to work. Once the sketch comments are received by the design team, they often come back to us, and we ask or answer questions for them and iron out any of their major concerns. And then they move forward into the construction document phase. That's where they actually go out and survey the property. They do all the topo, look for any trees that need to be preserved, see any, really the site, anything that has to do with the site to move forward. And they develop the construction documents to meet all of the city requirements. So they're reviewed by our subdivision staff, our zoning staff, engineering, urban forestry, erosion control. They could be reviewed by the county for greenway purposes. And those construction documents go through a cycle of reviews until they meet all city requirements. At that point, then they can be issued a grading permit. And once that grading permit is issued, they can start construction on the site. The developer then goes through the process of constructing all the improvements per the construction documents. And once that occurs, then the plat, which is the legal document that creates lots and public right-of-way, new streets, that can be reviewed again by our staff to make sure it's consistent with the construction plans. And then the developer would post a bond or a performance guarantee, guaranteeing to the city that those public improvements are going to be installed, or if they're not installed, then the performance guarantee allows the city to build them per the plan. Once that guarantee is posted, then the map can be recorded with the Register of Deeds. So through the subdivision process, we are building a transportation network, and that can be both connecting neighborhoods to each other, connecting places that we live, work, and play to each other. And we do that through paths and streets and pedestrian and bike facilities. All of these are looked at as creating network within the city as we review subdivision plans. Next. We also, the city has plans for larger streets that aren't the local streets in our neighborhood, and those are considered arterial streets. The ordinance requires or will require an 18-month reservation for that right-of-way to allow for the city to come in and either purchase the property from a developer, to allow for a street extension to occur, or to build it within that right-of-way. For local and collector streets, the developer or property owner is responsible for building the streets with development. Along with the reservation, there's also a bonus dedication that occurs when that land is dedicated to the city. And that's in neighborhood 1, a 10% bonus. So when a project comes in for subdivision review, we look at how the network is going to be extended into the site. And first we start with the measuring the boundaries to see how many blocks are need to be created. We look at where existing streets may touch that property already and that need to be extended. And then we extend those roads through the development to create blocks that meet the requirements. So just as we said before, we would measure across a property boundary to say, for instance, it may be a 1,200-foot property line. Then we would divide by the ordinance required preferred block length to see how many streets would be created along that property boundary, or how many blocks are created by the streets. We also look at physical obstacles such as freeways and railroads, gas pipelines, topography and natural slopes, wetlands and creeks and floodplain. And we have to take those into account as we develop the network throughout the city or throughout a development site. If it's a manufacturing facility, we also look at how large those buildings are and the property shape, or do those land uses really, like if it's next to a residential neighborhood, for instance, maybe that manufacturing facility shouldn't be connected to it, or the traffic should go a different way. And all these things are taken into account as we review a subdivision. I believe Julian's next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julian Burton. I am a transportation planner with Charlotte Department of Transportation. I was also part of the core team that worked on the regulations in SSI. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about access and driveways. And SSI includes regulations related to access and driveways to help support a multimodal vision that's laid out in the 2040 Comprehensive Plan for Transportation. And many of those regulations are intended to deal with access from streets into sites. But we're also formally introducing a new concept to require, oh, sorry, my lights just went out. Well, I think you can still see me. Sorry about that. We're also formally introducing a new concept to require connections between adjacent properties or between sites on the same property outside of the street network. And this is to help provide safe and comfortable access for pedestrians, cyclists, and motor vehicles. So ultimately, cross-access is going to reduce the amount of cars that have to enter and exit sites for short trips. This helps with safety. It reduces pedestrian and vehicular conflicts along the arterials because there's less cars using those driveways when they can access adjacent sites through the cross-access connection. That's going to also reduce traffic as there's, again, less cars going in and out of the site along those driveways just to travel short distances that can add to congestion. And then ultimately that supports a multimodal street design. There's less cars coming in and out, creates a safer and more comfortable environment for pedestrians and cyclists, and then encourages use of those modes. So just to kind of give a high-level overview on the requirements, there's several ways that a developer and owner could achieve a cross-access connection. It could be a drive aisle, like you see in this graphic here. There's a drive aisle connecting multiple adjacent sites outside of the street network. But you could also achieve cross-access under certain conditions through an alley or a service drive. Just generally, cross-access is going to apply to most non-residential sites and primarily along arterial streets. So a lot of single-family residential is going to be exempt from these types of requirements. And I also want to mention that the requirements do include flexibility and exceptions that are built in to account for the built environment and existing conditions. If a required cross-access connection is currently unavailable, it's likely that the owner or developer would have to build a stub connection to the adjacent site. And if there's an existing stub already present for cross-access connection, then the property owner or developer would likely have to connect to that stub. So after going through cross-access, I just want to take a step back and think more generally about driveways and access. As we've mentioned, SSI does include some language related to driveways and access. One main thing that it does is formalize the review and approval of new and existing driveways, but it also has a lot of references to a supporting document called the Streets Manual that's currently drafted as well. And most of the driveway and access details are located in that Streets Manual, including requirements for turn lanes, which are an important aspect of access requirements. That being said, there are still some driveway regulations included specifically in SSI's ordinance, and those include a driveway distance from intersections, closing or relocating of existing driveways, conditions under which access may be limited to less than full movement, standards for driveway alignment, and internal access. And we also include flexibility and modification language that allows for administrative approval when there's safety or operational issues with a specific requirement. And I also want to mention we have a new requirement that limits residential lots to one driveway per frontage. And that includes lots for duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes. And there's several reasons that we've put that in, but ultimately it helps limit impervious surfaces. It can help protect trees and ultimately just provide for a more comfortable and usable streetscape in residential areas. So as I mentioned, we do have a supporting document called the Streets Manual that supports the UDO. And it includes 3 different components: the streets map document that has a lot of information related to the actual streets map, driveway and access rules, and the comprehensive transportation review. We're gonna touch more on these components at the January 11th meeting that Kevin May mentioned earlier. But we did want to mention that all 3 components are available for review and comment currently. And you can provide comments through January 14th, just like you can with the UDO. So if you're interested in learning more about these documents or providing feedback to us, we welcome that. You can see the QR code in the slide, and there's a link as well that will take you to those documents. And of course, if you have any trouble getting to those, just let us know and we can make sure that you get access to that as well. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it back over to Kevin May to talk more about some network and access aspects of SSI.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you, Josh, as well for your presentations. And as Josh mentioned, in building the network, this isn't just about vehicles; it's about pedestrians and bicycles as well. And so part of that network that we try to get in our community are pedestrian and bike facilities. And you can think of these as the transit trail, or think the rail trail along the Blue Line, greenway trails. Think about the Cross Charlotte Trail, and also think about off-street trail connections. And how do you get from maybe a street along a very long block to the rail trail or the Cross Charlotte Trail? So part of connecting to those off-street public paths would be off-street trail connections, which I said would be a way to connect to a park or the off-street public path, allowing access to those public facilities, increasing mobility and access to green and open spaces. Now, whether or not off-street trail connections or how many are required will depend on the length of the frontage of the property to be recorded with a public access easement. And important to note that these may also be combined with other required access, such as, I know, for example, I think firefighting access. Rounding out our presentation this afternoon is touching base very briefly on other infrastructure. As we mentioned, we recognize subdivisions create streets, which, all of which could be considered infrastructure. But those other infrastructure pieces are also drainage and the water supply or sewers. Drainage, which a lot currently is spoken to in the current subdivision regulations, is actually moving in total to Part 9 of the UDO, which is the stormwater and natural resources piece. And the virtual conversation, in case you're interested in hearing more about that, will actually take place on January 5th next year. And then with water supply and sewer for a lot of our subdivision developments, as Josh explained, part of the review process is ensuring that those facilities are provided, and also those water supplies and sewer supplies come with both a public connecting to the city system or a private option. In either instance, there's a lot of standards that must be met to ensure that they are compliant with all applicable regulations. So circling back and pulling out a little bit from SSI specifically, as we mentioned, this is the first draft of the UDO released in October. We're going through community engagement meetings like this virtual conversation through this first engagement phase. We'll be doing this through early 2022. Much like the streets manual, the comments on the first draft of the UDO are going to be accepted through January 14th next year. And if you want more information or updates regarding the UDO, we encourage you to visit our website at charlotteudo.org. This is a little bit of an outline for where we're at with our virtual conversations. As you can see, we've had 3 on various topics up until today. Today, we're meeting on SSI. we have another virtual conversation regarding the neighborhood zoning districts, one in the afternoon and one in the evening coming up on Thursday. These conversations on the various topics will take place, as I said, through the first public engagement phase in January 2022. Each conversation is going to focus on a specific topic area. They're 1 hour in length, scheduled from noon to 1 and then 6 to 7 on the same days. Registration is required. So be sure, if you're interested in any of these topic areas, be sure you get registered for that specific session so that you have the link to attend. To register and get that link, you can simply go online to the flyer at charlotteudo.org or scan the QR code on the slide on the screen. Again, another plug for the UDO website. That's where you can find the complete first draft of the Unified Development Ordinance. If you have comments or feedback or questions regarding the first draft, you should do it. We're asking you, please, to do it through the online platform. That way, it's the best way to hold us accountable and be sure that your feedback is not only registered, but you're holding staff accountable to respond to some of the questions, clarifications, feedback that you may have. Also on the site, you'll find additional information with regard to upcoming schedules, any upcoming virtual conversations, some FAQs and more. And then also on that site, as we understand that a 600-page plus document may not be the easiest to get through and trying to read, we've got a very handy reference guide that is available on our charlotteudo.org website, 26 pages, broken down to very simple, easy to understand concepts to help guide you through the larger document. It also provides a summary of some of the new changes that you may see in transitioning from the current system to the new system with the Unified Development Ordinance, including residential overlays, parking tiers, tree preservation, and topical to today, transportation improvements. For the virtual conversation today, we had one question that we received from the registered attendees prior to today's session. That question was, how are greenways and parks recognized as green infrastructure? I'm not certain, but I think this came from somebody with Mecklenburg Park and Rec, and I'm not entirely sure if I get the gist of the question. Is there Gwen or somebody with Mecklenburg County Park and Rec that would like to perhaps take a moment and unmute and provide some additional context for that question?
Hey, Kevin, it's Katie Daughtry. I can unmute, but if it was Gwen's comment, I unfortunately don't know what she was asking, but I can certainly look into that for you.
Okay.
And reach out to you offline.
Okay, that sounds great. I appreciate it. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Katie. I was trying to think of who with our Mecklenburg County park partners may be with us, and I did see you pop in, but I did not see Gwen. So yeah, I would appreciate if you could maybe get some context on that, and we'll certainly circle back with you and follow up on that question and getting clarification on that. That being said, I'm looking here at our chat screen, and excuse me, it appears that we've had a couple of questions submitted, but I think they have been taken care of by staff in the course of the presentation. Let's see. I'm not seeing. Oh, no, I do see Eric's question being responded to. We do have a question from Addison regarding cross access, and the question is cross access will be required of adjacent parcels with separate property owners. Julian, would you like to chime in on that?
Yeah, I actually switched rooms, so okay. I'm sitting with Felix. Let me know if you can see me or not.
We could, yep, you're good.
Okay. Addison, thank you so much for your question. The short answer is yes. It would be required between adjacent parcels with separate property owners, but it's only going to be triggered when there's a new primary structure or a subdivision that occurs. So it's not going to be retroactively required on two existing developments, but if one of them were to tear down their building or one of them was vacant, and a new building was constructed, then they would be required to at least stub to the adjacent property. And then that adjacent property, when it was redeveloped, would then finish that connection. Let me know if you need any more information than that. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Julian and Team CDOT. I think that brings us current with everything that I'm seeing in the chat window. I'm going to lean a little bit on my teammates as if there's something in the chat that I'm missing that was unanswered, please let me know. Other than that, I think we're caught up. So we've got 15 minutes. We're more than happy to field any additional questions or comments that you all may have. So please, if you've got something that you've been needing clarification on or aching to ask, please feel free. Anybody? I'm starting to see a lot, or well, not a lot, but I'm starting to see people peel off. Okay, in the interim, anybody from Team Charlotte have anything that they want to say before? Sorry, Dr. Sylvia Bittle, and I'm sorry, Bittle Patton. Do the chat questions show up in the recording later? Yolanda, did you want to clarify on that?
Sure. So yes, we are in the process of actually pulling the chats from each session. They will be along with the video, and we actually have a page that actually has all of our recordings on it. So I'll share that in the chat. I'll need to pull that really quickly, but these are on YouTube, and the chat will be in the link within the description of the YouTube. So yes.
Yeah, and Dr. Biddle Patton, we've also taken to try to also verbalize, the presenters are trying to verbalize the questions that may have gone unanswered in chat during this conversation or this discussion period, so that, people viewing this at a later time that weren't here live have the benefit of maybe hearing those questions be expressed, so they don't have to necessarily have to rely solely on that separate chat reference sheet as well. Any other comments, questions, feedback? Not seeing anything. Here we go. Eric Zavril asked, could the link for the supporting docs, such as the streets maps, the driveway manual, or the streets manual with the driveway regulations, et cetera, feedback, be added to the UDO comment page for the SSI section? I'm going to rely a little bit on CDOT for this, and I don't know that that's feasible, Eric, simply because the two documents are kind of going through separate but concurrent review processes, and one is having to do completely with CDOT and what they do internally, as opposed to the UDO, which is something that is more regulatory. So I don't see that happening now. I don't know, CDOT, if you feel any differently. I just don't see that being feasible.
Kevin, not much to add. Just maybe that I think it is. There's a link to it in the supporting resources page.
Yeah. So, right? Eric, to be clear, the streets manual and the pieces that CDOT is working on to complement the UDO is available in the resources tab of the UDO. The comments will not be though. I don't know if that helps you at all. And I can see you shaking your head. Did you want to unmute and have 2 cents?
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I was just trying to help folks who are trying to give feedback to both of those. When they're in one document, they kind of have to, hunt for the other one. And sometimes it's confusing of where to put the feedback in for some of those different supporting documents. I've heard some folks say, oh, you find it in the UDO that has some supporting docs, and then you put it in there or in the general. So just trying to make it easier for folks to get the feedback in the right place, so it's not confusing for you guys as well. So Gotcha. It was just more of a link in the subdivision streets infrastructure, even if it's like a call out that just says, and if you have feedback for this, those documents, here's the link for the comment that's separate from the UDO, but at least they know where to put them and they're not ending up in the wrong place. Thank you.
I understand that better now, and I appreciate that. And the team hears you now. We'll see if we can't make that happen. Although I'm not sure. Faith, where does our team see additional efficiencies and cost savings in this new process, both for customers and the city? And who would like to? Anybody would like to address that? Laura, that might be a good one because it's kind of overarching, conceptually for the UDO.
I think just to go back a little bit on the UDO as a whole and efficiencies and cost savings. Efficiencies are intended, and we're still working on some of this.
Laura, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, and I appreciate you chiming in, but you've got a little bit of a reverberation effect going on with your mic. I'm sorry. I don't know if you want to join us by phone, or if Alan, if you want to chime in where Laura was going with what her stream was.
Yeah, Kevin, I'm not really prepared with an answer for that right now. We can always get back on that question.
Okay, fair enough. Faith, we will circle back to you, and I apologize for the audio difficulties that Laura is having with her microphone. But we will certainly circle back to you. I know we see you frequently at our virtual conversations. So I have full faith and confidence that you will hear back from us, being that we're going to be in another virtual conversation with you at some point going forward. Anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Team Charlotte, anything from our end? All right, very good. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you so much. I'll reiterate what I said at the outset. The city and the UDO team remains committed to engaging with you through this process and making this much about your feedback as it is with us presenting you information. If you have an opportunity, if you'd like to touch base again regarding this, or if you think of something between now and later this evening, if you're not already registered, please feel free to register for the 6 to 7 SSI virtual conversation. And with that, we'll bid you all adieu and give you about 7-8 minutes back into your midday hour. So thank you very much. Enjoy the day. Thank you for being here.
Okay, I think we're good.
I think everyone's
Did
out.
you stop?